David Douglas, how are you, sir?
I'm well. Thanks, Matt.
Great.
How are you this morning?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for coming in. Thanks for making the time. We've already gotten going hot and heavy here. This is fantastic.
We have. I'm only insulted by the fact you didn't ask me earlier. Come on, buddy. I guess I'm off the horizon. That's how insignificant college presidents are these days.
Oh, but that's insignificant.
What am I, third? What am I, fifth? Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I look forward to this again. I just want to say up front how much I've enjoyed your podcast. We were chatting before we got underway here about the kind of democratization of access, right, to public communication. This did not exist 20 years ago. The individual who had something to say, who could accrue a large band of enthusiastic followers, that just wasn't going to happen. And this is everybody has 15 minutes, right? And if you can find folks to listen, you can blow up. And congratulations, you've managed, I think, a range of topics and a range of guests, notwithstanding my own presence, that has really proven to be compelling. So thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you for being here, right? Like it's very interesting when people, I take criticism a lot from a lot of different angles, and people are like, you should have this on. Why didn't you do that? And it's like, people have to voluntarily come in here. Sure. And it's not always the most fun proposition for people. They're like, I don't want to be on camera. I don't want to talk about these things. I don't want to be held to scrutiny. Yeah. Some people very much thrive off of
and those people should not ever be invited.
They should not.
But again, isn't that true of the world?
I have a list of people that are blocked.
We were talking, precisely. And again, my own, again, I don't want to keep referring to things we spoke about a second ago.
You're the guest, man. Talk about whatever you want.
Yeah. I personally am a very private person. I mentioned, I don't even like bumper stickers. I don't judge others. I laugh at them. They're fun. I like to read them when I'm a stoplight. And yard signs, boy, I get that folks want to step behind their candidates and make their public voice known. I applaud it. There's something visceral deep inside me that just recoils from that. And the reason for that is because I am all about dialogue. I want to talk to people to find out what they believe, what their values are. And as soon as we put each other inside of a frame or box, it feels like that possibility is just dead. It's killed. And so, I think that's probably going to be part of the theme for us in this conversation, if to the extent that we talk about education at all, because, there are formal names for dialectic, right? I mean, how do you know what you know? How do you know anything about the world, about politics, about society values, about, the weather, from the profound to the trivial? To me, I remember as a kid, I came up in a very religious family, and I remember at that early age that I think most of us began to wonder, question about the world, of what we had been taught. And I remember not, knowing where I could go for answers. And later, much later in college, like you, sir, two rhetoricians, I remember discovering dialectic, the concept of effectively triangulation, right? You listen to everything, you look at everything, you do your best to analyze it. And you also pay attention to, the foot traffic, to where people have gone before you. And I love that idea. You don't know what you know until you articulate it, and talk about it with somebody else, and they challenge it. And there's this fascinating body of psychological theory related to adherence that suggests that, you take a profoundly held belief, and it turns out if it's never challenged, you don't have to defend it and think about it, then it's brittle. And effectively, it can be broken easily. So for those folks who say, we should never engage in counter argument, we should never have to have our ideas challenged, school should really teach one thing and people will believe that thing. We should be worried about censorship, books that are dangerous. The reality is, let me give you an example. The studies that demonstrate, for example, it takes something that everybody would probably say is a great idea, brushing your teeth.
Sure.
And they literally conducted this study on how easy it is to convince somebody they shouldn't brush their teeth. You say, well, that's ridiculous. How could you ever tell somebody not to brush their teeth? Why would they believe that? Bad breath, bad dates. I don't, gingivitis. And it turns out that they construed this series of counter arguments that said, actually, it causes your gums to recede. It can lead to gum disease. You could lose your teeth. It's a terrible series of things. All true. They didn't make any of it up. And they said that there is a number, you actually would probably be better off using a mild mouthwash, a kind of rinse, right? And that in fact wouldn't have all these negative effects. And they were able to show, via the, dental studies that this was true. And what they found was that people had never even thought about not brushing their teeth, because it's a thing that is ubiquitous. Everybody does it. And so the point to this is not that you should not brush your teeth. I'd like to be really clear about that. But rather, when they would take these taken for granted, these assumed beliefs, and challenge them, what they found is they're easily snapped. And people will change their minds. And they know by, again, Likert scale surveys afterward, people are like, I found that convincing. And the point to all that is, through a lot of study, that you should always challenge beliefs, not in order to overcome them, but in order to temper them and develop resilience, right? Like tempering steel, in the sense that it can be brittle if you are not tempering it appropriately to provide that resilience. We're easily changed. And so the best thing you can do, not only in terms of discovery of what you believe, but also in terms of adherence to that, developing a kind of resiliency of what you believe, the best thing you can do is argue with other people, and argue not in ad hominem, I'm going to insult your ways.
You have to argue very
the
carefully.
Ideas, yeah. What's in contest? Not the humans, it's the ideas in contest. We're just giving them voice. And you come away, lots of confirmation about this in the empirical world. You come away with a changed mind. And again, I'm going to be really clear about this. Not flag in the wind is not what we are. We are more sturdy ourselves in our thinking and our ideas. So it's not the case that somebody says something, then you believe it or you say it, although there is an interesting body of counter-attitudinal advocacy and mind changing, which suggests that when we articulate a position that we don't ourselves hold, we actually do go a little ways in maybe weakening or softening our beliefs, because we really engage those counter-arguments by articulating them. And so again, that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. And so that process of dialogue is epistemic, right? It teaches us things. We learn things through the process of engaging other people in discussion. And it amounts to this wonderful analogy to, wayfinding. You're triangulating. You're looking for points of reference and declination, and you figure out with a compass which direction you should go. And I think that there's a lovely analogy there to learning things and understanding your role in the world and everybody else's, by getting lots of opinions, testing them, and finding out which ones really have merit.
God bless everything you just said. I have to tell you something. There's no way you would ever know this. I actually have a family member who engaged in stopping brushing her teeth and instead brushing her teeth with, I believe it was whole milk, unpasteurized
from
yogurt.
A goat. Okay.
No,
right.
I think it was.
Oh, the acidity.
I think it was cow. I'm not 100% sure, but she and her person had gotten essentially convinced by this alternate dentist that they literally were convinced they were going to regrow their teeth. They were going to recalcify the portions.
All right. Thanks.
It was like 4 months later, they both had these horrific
sores in their mouths.
Oh, terrible stuff. And they, in fact, considered taking legal action against this alternate dentist, right? Goodness. And you can imagine how that didn't work out, right? But I so appreciate the idea that this particular family member, even though I thought it was crazy that she was engaging this, it's like, she's trying to iron this out. She's trying to figure out what's true. But again, how do we know things that are true? When you were even saying that, I brought up cooking a turkey earlier, right? And the idea of who knows how to cook a turkey? And the answer really should be, I know it because it works, right? And we have to have some degree of, how can we figure out this actually, do we know that brushing your teeth is good or that it's bad? How do we know this other option will work?
I mean, right? Start with the classics, right? I mean, I love Aristotle's notion that he says, look, you can know something 3 ways. One is that you can feel it. It rises in your chest. Your heart rises. You just feel this passion, right? Pathos. Somebody you trust tells you. Ethos, right? Somebody else, right? You've told me, I trust you. Okay, great. I believe it. I don't need to go check on my own. And the third way, which he said was the best way, was logos, was reason. And at that time, it wasn't like, oh, yeah, reason, I get that. There was no such thing. They didn't know it. They had received, right, wisdom coming to them from Homer, hundreds of years prior that came down through oral tradition. Heraclitus said, look, the sun is the size of a human foot. Show me it's not, right?
Right.
Alongside don't eat white beans, literally. I mean, those were the kinds
Don't eat white beans?
I'm not making that up. And so they had these dictums, these aphorisms, and they're like, okay, I guess that's true. How do I know? And Aristotle said, no. Look, you take something you know is true, and you put that together with other things that you know are true, and they produce a new understanding that you didn't know is true, but you can produce from those first two things. And he had these great simple examples. And look, you have a bucket of water, you knock a hole in it, water flows out, right? And so water goes through holes. Okay, all right. Human skin, I notice, when we exercise, gets wet. Okay, take those two things. Water comes through holes and my skin gets wet. Therefore, maybe, wait for it, skin has holes. You can't see them. You don't discern them in any other way, but he perceived that skin probably has holes in it. And that's where that water comes from. And they thought of other, possibilities. I don't know, maybe it spontaneously from the air or something. No, he was pretty sure it was holes. Turns out he's right. And they were not able to confirm that with magnifying glasses or microscopes. At the time. Oh,
and mind you, they didn't understand what condensation was either.
No, they did not.
So there's that.
Fair. And they probably,
I don't know, it just came from the air. That's crazy, bro. That's ridiculous.
But you see the point, which is that you can reason by taking things known and things unknown and find your way from here to there. And he claimed to have invented it. Maybe he did. There are other arguments to that. But that notion, fundamentally, that you can reason your way through the world, remains, I think, a really important aspect of any educational process. The declamation, chanting, memorization, those cards that some of us, if you're old enough, had to memorize the vocab. I love those, by the way. It turns out that's the weakest and most easily forgotten way to learn anything, and it's not sticky. But it turns out if you can dig in and encounter dialogue around complex, wicked problems, that is sticky and it lasts. It stays with you because what you've done is you've enabled it to penetrate that kind of hard rock of human consciousness, right? You think back to what you learned in college, how much you've forgotten, how much you learned in high school or elementary school, and what little you may recall. And there's a fair amount of study that shows we forget almost all the facts that we learned in college about 2 years out. Even the really clever students that memorized all the facts, they forget faster, so learn more, forget faster. And then about 2 years out, everybody intersects. And the point to that is, well, what's college worth, right? If you forget everything in a couple of years. And of course, some things you continue to study or utilize every day. So they'll stay with you. But more importantly, the wisdom as compared to the knowledge. You may not remember all the Einstein famously said something, like, I don't remember the speed of sound. I don't need to because it's, I can look it up in any book. And so really, pushed aside the notion of knowing at your fingertips all of the information in the world. And of course, that was long before the internet. Here we are. Everyone has all the information in the world
and how
in their
much smarter
cellular device.
We're so
I would say dumber.
Smarter.
I would say dumber.
Oh my gosh, look at us. We're so. And to one of these points, I think. Like I have a 13-year-old. He's really into baking.
I don't want to say I'm sorry, but keep going. Hey, we both have three sons. You and I share that suffering.
9, 11, and 13, man. It's my house is
great.
pretty wild. Yeah. And my 13-year-old really likes baking. He really likes desserts. And at least to his credit, he's like, okay, I'll bake it. I'll make the whole thing, right?
Oh, good kid.
I can guarantee you that whatever he bakes, there's 0% chance that when he's 30, he's going to remember the ingredients that went into this. So memorizing facts, right? It's always been my assertion that it's like, look, if you want to ask me facts from things I studied in college, that's not relevant. I learned how to bake, and learning how to bake, learning how to use the tools, learning how to beat these things up, to understand combinations of things. That's what you actually take away, or at least it was in my case.
Yeah. Well, and that's a nice bridge to, what I do. And again, I don't want to dominate the airwaves with conversations about my job, but I would like to point to it.
I didn't have you come on to talk about my job.
What? You don't even know. I'm really good at some other things. Like I don't know. I make a mean lens retort, but more
that sounds delicious.
Yeah, it turns out not. I make a good one. But it's not a good. It's not a good context.
It's fine. Keep going.
Anyway, so to the point, education, right? I mean, we talked a little before we began formally to hit the switch that sort of our respective paths, and we have some interesting commonalities on those paths. Here's one that probably we don't share in common. I grew up abroad. I was on a tiny little island in the smallest village on that island over by the Philippines. My mom was a teacher in a village, and I was baggage along with my brother. And so all my memories are from growing up in Agate, a tiny little place, more chickens, pigs, dogs than there were people. And education was, fair to say, not very productive or highly regarded, but it was a brilliant place to grow up. Just such a social place. Everybody, got along. Everybody knew each other. Yeah, there were fights on a regular basis, but we also had to get over them because you could never avoid seeing anyone, right? You could see them every day. And then came to the States about high school age. Which, by the way, is the worst time to, I think, disrupt your life. Didn't know a person on the continent who wasn't directly related to me. And we dropped into the San Joaquin Valley in California. And so went to school, didn't know anybody, didn't fit in every way. And hey, here's another good part. We were really poor, like government cheese poor, like Pell Grant poor. I mean, park your car on your lawn poor, I mean, all those signs. And that was me. And
we didn't have dining room chairs in my house. We had discount lawn chairs from like Ace Hardware.
Nice.
I remember these
High five.
brittle white plastic.
That's it. I know the ones.
Yeah. And we actually, my parents, had a split up when I was in like second grade or something. And it was kind of crazy before then. And that got crazier even after. But I remember in third grade, we had moved into this place that had a pool in the backyard. And the pool was so neglected from maintenance that the county mosquito abatement guy would
came
have to
after
come
you.
by
Nice.
and
just
like
spray your pool.
Because you would just like look like I have an education on what mosquito larvae look like. Like
wow.
nobody, like I would stare at them for hours, just swimming around. Like it was, and you could only see like 3 inches down into the pool. So it was, so I have an appreciation for that.
Yeah, kind of botanical and biological experience between the moss and the animals living in it. But there's a story there that I won't tell.
Oh my gosh.
It'll take too long. I'll make a shorter version of this one, which is, I think the defense, the good news about that is you don't know what you don't know. And so, we didn't know we were poor, right? We had a great time there, actually in high school there, met the person who would become my wife and in swim class. And, but in terms of, thinking about my life trajectory, I had no idea, honestly. We didn't have a trend or a tradition in my family. We didn't have a business, of course. And so didn't have any idea. What do people do? Well, there's doctors and lawyers. I knew there were teachers because, my mom. But really wildly ignorant about what people did, and did what I had this odd penchant for standardized tests, and so SAT got me some mailings from schools that said, "Hey, you should think about coming here." I had no idea why. Why I didn't understand why I didn't know how they got my name, why were they writing to me. I didn't know the difference between publics and privates and twos and fours. Brand. I didn't understand any of that, But I had a reason to hang around. My mom at that time was diagnosed, and it's another part of the story with cancer. So for the next 4 years, I hung out, lived at home, took care of her, went to college, local state U. And California has a brilliant state university system that you know very well from your own experience. And I paid next to nothing for it. I mean, honestly, between Pell and the rack rate, it just wasn't very expensive. And I found my way by accident. Most of my classes were 200, 300, 400 students. And, I was a dutiful student, I knew how to pay attention in classes. So I did well in terms of grades, but I didn't know almost any of my professors because a lot of the classes were taught by grad students and others, there were just too many. It didn't scale. And so by accident, I bumped into my academic advisor. I thought I was going to law. That would be my path.
And me, man.
There it is. Well, honestly, to this day, I have on one of my shelves. Here's a confession. I have this odd book. I won't call it a fetish. That's a little strong. I think I don't use that word. But I like books. And somewhere among my thousands of books, there is a book from that period of time, like how to get into med school, how to get into law school. And, I was like, I didn't have other places to go for that information. Anyway, the point is, I thought that was where I was going. Although I didn't know lawyers, I didn't work with any of them. I had no idea except what I'd seen on television or some such thing. And so I really was trying to move in a direction. I didn't have good reasons to go in one or another. Med school, I just had, not taken the path by the time I figured out the prereqs that you needed. Sure. So, okay, all right, fine. So I figured, I did law. And around that time, my mom was slowly dying. She had worked her way through chemo and radiation and the conventional therapies. And she, for a deeply religious person, she clung to life. She was a fighter. And so she wanted to try non-traditional. We lived in Nevada for a while, did naturopathic medicine. We were in Mexico for a while, did Laetrile. I'm giving her shots every day. And it was a surreal period in my life. And I, some part of my brain, right. Yeah, what a good son. Look at me, dutifully taking care of her. And, my brother had already launched at that time. So he was out saying, good luck with that. I mean, that's cruel, but Jeff was living his own life. And actually that's more cruel than true. And the reality is I have a great brother and he and I love each other. So I shouldn't cast any shade at him. But as she was passing,
listen, life is really complex.
It was.
And in different phases of your life, especially as a younger person myself, I remember, like, I kind of cut off relationships with people. It's like, I'm trying to survive right now, and I'm trying to make my way through whatever this mess is.
What'd your family look like? What did that look like for you?
For me, so this is kind of I was reflecting on. So my dad moved to Alaska when I was 15. Yeah. So I was living with my mom. We were renting this house in Concord.
There we are.
And I was the last kid, and I had there was some turmoil from my older siblings, but again, I was the last one. By the time I came around, my mom was very much, like I love my mom, but she was donezo. Like she didn't, I remember I went to this, I had an athletic awards, my last athletic award ceremony in high school. I was getting a plaque because I had managed to get 10 varsity letters out of the 12 seasons of high school. Yeah,
Holy
and I was captain of all of this, and I was also first trumpet in the jazz band, and I was in calculus. Like I was in, so I was doing a lot of things. Man. And my mom didn't have the energy to go that night, right? So it was that kind of thing. So when I went out and moved to college, she moved out of the house and moved away. And at that point, it was like, it's sink or swim, man. Yeah, like I was sleeping on the boathouse floor for like a couple months, right? So for me, it was like, listen, I never went back home for the holidays. Like there wasn't a home back where I had grown up because my mom had moved. No, and again, it's not. My point is that I feel bad, yes, and I have felt bad at times about like I didn't keep relationships with my childhood friends, or I didn't, invest. But it's like, listen, man. At some point, you got to just be like, look, I got to find another meal. I got to get through the day. Well, I don't know how this thing
same.
Life works.
I hung on to so few of my friends from that period of time. And I completely empathize with what you just said. Part of it is, you've got business to take care of on your own. Right. But part of it is as well, I've thought of that a lot, by the way. You've turned a page in your life. Maybe you're not that person any longer. And so it's not, denial of who you were, that hardship. But it does feel like, in a way, that's the end of a chapter. And,
yes.
And again, I've reflected on that. Is it a desire to just shut that out or pretend it never happened? And I don't think that's it. I think that there's just a demarcation there. Right. It's really hard to go back and be that person again. And so you've changed.
And people go through things. Again, to your point about your brother, I found out later that people were themselves going through things.
Oh, yeah,
I wasn't
absolutely
there,
true.
and it's like,
we both were.
Everybody's going through things. Yeah. So the fact that I had moved on, or I was attempting to square away this other aspect of my life. Like, I'm sorry I couldn't be everything for everyone at the time, but as a young man, life is messy.
Well,
right?
and again, I'm headed for a point. I'm just taking a long time getting there. So when she died, when my mom died, January, my senior year in college, we had taken extra time away. I'd taken a year off and to do all these other things with her, and she finally passed away. And I was just decimated. I didn't have any purpose or direction. Didn't know what I was doing. And of course, again, that young man's fantasy before she passed, I had all these, I'd fallen deeply in love with climbing, and I just wanted to travel the world and find more mountains and all these things that I thought I could be doing, but I wasn't because, look what a good person. And then when she passed, it was just empty vessel, all that was gone. And the lie was called out, my lie to myself, right? That I had really no motivation suddenly. But the guy that I had stumbled into as a mentor in college, Hal Boken, was, he's like, you don't have a direction. I'll give you a direction. You don't know what to do. I'll tell you what to do. It wasn't quite that simple, but close. I mean, literally, he said, you're going to go take the GRE, the graduate record exam. Yeah. I went to Tower Records and got a ticket, places you would go to get tickets to a concert when Tower Records was still a thing. I went the night before on Friday night and got tickets to take the graduate record examination the next morning.
And they were selling those at Tower Records.
Yeah. Because it was a ticket sales.
Trip.
Yeah, no, I remember it well. And so with all that prep, but again, I had in my back pocket a certain capacity for standardized tests, so that'll be fine. And so what he had told me to do was like, don't coast to a halt, right?
Momentum.
Do something. Thank you. That's it. Momentum was the analogy. And so he said, do grad program, do master's degree. And I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. And the epiphany was, I just felt like my heart stopped beating in January. It didn't beat again until September. Walked in, first day grad student, right? Great indentured servitude, so common across the country. I got my education for free. They paid me $17,000 a year, I think, but they waived all the fees, tuition, everything else, and because California, they even gave me health care. So you could survive. You're not going to get rich. But what they earned back was I taught 2 classes, fundamental classes in the field, and all the students in there paid money to the college, and so that's the way the financial equation worked. And how those students must have suffered, I can't imagine, but I learned my craft at their expense. And from the first day, it was just, talk to interesting people about interesting ideas that matter. They pay you to do this. I have to do that the rest of my life. I mean, I remember that second day, the first week was just such a a turning point for me.
You should start a podcast with me. Interesting people, interesting ideas,
Right?
all day, every
so
day.
Here we high five, buddy. Yeah,
I frequently describe it as like it's like taking a 10-hour college seminar every day, all day. And
Bingo.
I literally at the end of the day, I'm like, I can't believe nobody else knows that. This is the craziest thing ever.
And it just blows your head up, doesn't it? Yeah. And for me as well. And so for me, I felt like, fine, I could get more than they did, but I also had a job to do, which was if I got the context right, if I set it up right, the readings, the questions, the material in front of us, the class would just explode with this vitality and energy. Everybody wanted in, and I felt like I was really doing the job well. It was about them, not me. And if I got it wrong and the class just sat there all day, then I got to try again a couple of 3 days later. And so for me, it was a perfect sounding board. I found intellectually, I love that sprint. Like they were the cruelest of masters in the sense that they're not going to ever take a pity question. They're going to
dude. The 19-year-olds don't pull.
They
punches.
do not. There it is.
They're not. They can't even fake it. They're just like they're either into it or they're not. And that's a beautiful A/B testing mechanism of okay, how do I fix this? Because again, I had cut my teeth also in teaching, but then ultimately moved to a classroom later. In my mid-30s, and I was like, this is wild, man. Like these kids are great, but like there is cruelty and there's beauty all in the same room.
Oh yeah, equal parts. That's not wrong. And I think what was I 22, something like that. So I was younger than some of them. So also that imposter syndrome thing going on where like you believe I'm a professor, then I also it must be. So again, fast forward through this, and so I figured, okay, I'm going to head that direction in my PhD and the rest of it, and the way that people do, big state systems, East Coast, West Coast, and finished out. And Lily at that time, she and I had been dating for like 11 years, more than a decade. Yeah. And she's flight crew for Delta, and so she was living in Dallas, I was in Pennsylvania, and we came to that hard, like, look, we either have to say goodbye, I love you, goodbye forever, or we have to find a way to be in the same place. So we can both do our jobs. And since I was finishing my PhD, the like spiders in the wind, right? You have to throw your web, see where you get picked up. She said, how about getting picked up on any state that has the Pacific Ocean attached to it? Because that'd be great. Because her family is West Coast. And okay, fine. And I got picked up by first tenure track job offer, small liberal arts college in the West. And
what college was
it? Willamette over in Oregon. A lot like College of Idaho.
Yeah.
And okay, didn't know much about it until I interviewed. I had never been there. I had made my climbing sojourns up the West Coast for many years.
Sure.
So I knew where Salem was, but I had never really stopped there. Stopped in Ashland, went to BC.
The Shakespeare's Festival, the whole thing.
There it is, bingo. Yeah. Headed over to Banff, Jasper, the Central Columbian Ice Fields. That was my destination. And the point to all that is that okay, fine. I was so ignorant about, again, remember that part about 2-year, 4-year, public, private, all that. I managed to sustain that all the way through a PhD because, I didn't really need to know. Sure. And didn't know what I got into. So a small private liberal arts college across the street from the Capitol. I met the governor the first day I interviewed there. He was eating in the cafeteria because food was better than at the Cap. And the state Supreme Court's across the street as well, and the district court, and everybody seemed to know everyone else. This insider, maybe rich kid school, and I just thought, what have I done? This is so contrary to my values of access, of let everybody who has capacity come and try it out, right? See if they can do it. I was all about that populist ethic, right? Because that had been me, right? I wanted that same opportunity for people to establish, to show they could do it. And it took me about 2 months to see how wildly wrong I was. That in fact that they had cast the doors open so far that every liberal arts college I know is barely solvent because they spend all their money on faculty and on students and on access. They give out scholarships to the extent that they enable virtually anybody to come. It doesn't matter how poor they are. There is a way. And the scale was such that instead of being in classes with 200 or 300 or 400 students, there were classes with 5 and 7 and 12. So the ratio was really an advantage. But equally important, what I learned was that this commitment to integration of knowledge. It wasn't that, you have to take these classes, here are your prereqs, there's a core, and then, general ed, right? And then you find your major, go do that thing, kind of checking boxes. But rather, it was a commitment to the fact that philosophy tells you so much about physics and math tells you about music and vice versa, right? That there was a commitment to the integration of knowledge and the understanding that we're educating a whole person here, not just part of their brain. It's not check boxes, it's you. And if you go back far enough, hence my own fixation on history of knowledge, history of math, right? The classics. I'm not a classicist, but I love learning.
Yeah, sure.
And so for me, that commitment to the breadth of education, not just letting somebody move narrowly through their college ed, but really insist that they learn broadly, but also employable, right? They've got to get a job. There has to be a value proposition there. But part of the value proposition, and this is where I was headed, that I think is lost in the conversations that we tend to have about higher ed right now, nationally, right? Is that you're developing a human, a whole human. And so it can't be either, hey, we're just developing workforce, right? All we're doing is developing, sort of minions to go out there, get jobs, do what the state needs. And I think that the conversation has lent itself to that extreme, and blotted completely out from our consideration the fact that these are humans. They have lives of value ahead of them. We should be developing moral sensibilities and civic engagement and very clear advantage to higher ed. Let me, just point at that. And right now I'm talking about any higher ed, liberal arts colleges, private, public, any kind, if you want to do something for a community, think of a town. We all have these small towns that we love, our imaginary, right? The way we think of them, like, small town America. And you think of the warmth and the community, the engagement and the lemonade stands and the people who vote and they have grumpy disagreements, but they're kind of funny because, nobody loses an eye, right?
Right.
You think of that kind of Mayberry, what you would have said, 50 years ago, right? But it's like, how do you get there from here? How do you develop a sense of community and value? And it turns out, if you could wave a wand, if you give everybody $100K, a new car, bigger house, what do you do that would materially improve the community, the sense of quality of life? And it turns out that the one thing that you could do that would be most transformative is you could increase the fraction of education that the people in that town have, because the empirical data are so clear. You improve the longevity, how long they live. You decrease infant mortality. You increase voter participation. You increase charitable giving. You increase what they say about the quality of their life. I mean, pick a metric. They all go up. The good ones go up. The bad ones go down, because there is something that is so transformative, developmental about inhabiting a space in which you are encouraged, given permission to think hard about the world. And again, let me quick shout out. This is not shilling liberal arts or College of Idaho. That little school over there, first school to start operation in the state, right? Neck and neck with University of Idaho. But I mean, a year after the state became a state, right? 1891. Right. The first president ran for governor twice, right? And we produced a bunch of, governors, the first federal magistrate in the state, right? In the history of the state of Idaho, Candydale. Academy Award winner, Pulitzer Prize winner, 11-time NBA All-Star, go Elgin Baylor. Tons of stories. The top school, and it has been named recently the top school in the nation in social mobility. People come in with no means, no privilege, no status, and they are put on a trajectory for the remainder of their lives. And
that's College of Idaho.
It's College of Idaho, number one, the U.S. News and World Report,
mobility.
Routinely named top in the state. And again, we're in this together. My colleagues, I was just over at the inauguration at NNU, where, I love my colleagues, higher education. We link arms. We're together in this. So again, I don't want to draw, any contrast that would cast shadows on them. But I do want to point out that this model is an astonishing one. The motto of the college, informal motto from the first president who served 44 years, William Judson Boone, was let them come, let them all come, and we'll see what they can do. And that remains at the center of the work that we do. We have so many students who come to us, 60% from the state of Idaho. And by that, I don't mean, Treasure Valley schools only. No, sure. I mean Treasure Valley schools. And I also mean, Riggins and pick a Greenleaf, right? Sandpoint, pick the closest and the farthest. We have kids from, Garden Valley, students who came to us from a high school graduating class of 40, as well as 400 and more. And the point is, we also not just 60%, right? I mean, the other 40%, we like it that way, by the way, 60%. We're place-based education. You could not unplug this place and drop it anywhere else in the country. It is an Idaho school. And so we love the fact that a majority of our students come from Idaho. But we also love the fact that we've had over 100 countries represented in the last few years. And those countries unlike a lot of schools, they're not students who we recruit to pay our bills. They come to us directly from, in some cases, camps. They've been dispossessed. They come to us as refugees. They come to us from, South Sudan, from Ethiopia. They come to us from the Marshall Islands in the Pacific, over by where I grew up, by the way. We have students from Nepal. We have students from, you pick a country, developed, underdeveloped, developing. And so you come in from, maybe you're coming to us from Victor, and your roommate is from South Sudan. And you can imagine, back to my comments about, the intersection of ideas and challenging culture, your own assumptions, not necessarily in a negative way. In fact, I hope it's not, but rather just by virtue of the contrast that exists. What would it have been like to grow up in that place, right? And you get to become maybe best friends with a person who had that life, and now they're living here with you. And I think that just, it pushes you to, it supercharges your development, your perception of the world. And that's what I'm reaching for. And because I don't think that, liberal arts college has a lock on that. That can be had in any educational context. We were talking, autodidact, look at you, that you don't have to go to college to get that, but you got to work a lot harder. College puts it in front of you. You have to dodge it, right?
Right.
Whereas if you have that initiative and the capacity and discipline to do it, great, do it. Here's a case study. A friend of mine used to work at the college. He and I overlapped about a year, and then his path took him a different place, Michael Vandervelde. And Michael, we had offices across the hall and became fast friends because we're both early morning people. And so, some ridiculous hour of the morning, we're in there drinking coffee and talking about life. And we decided we were going to sustain that when he left. And so every Wednesday, religiously, we said an hour, usually turned out to be 2. And by the way, I had to make some special concessions with my family in order to occupy every Wednesday night for an hour or 2. But we decided to fill gaps in our own experience, in areas that we didn't feel like we had really covered very well. And we would pick them. And so we picked film, like movies, right? Like neither one of us felt like we knew enough about cinema history or about French film noir or, Tarantino.
I took film noir. Big fan.
There it is.
Indemnity.
We'll come. Oh, there it is, sir.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that. Yeah. Eisenstein. Right. All the way forward. Or philosophy. We both, maybe one of us had done a deeper dive, but the other one hadn't. And we both felt like we'd benefit. What about art? Feeling like, oh, there's a thing. Boy, I wish I'd studied more, art history. Well, let's go. Let's do it. So we would wind our way through various topics, and we just, come up with them and talk about, like, okay, we'll make that one for the next few months. And we did that for over 2 years. Over 2 years. And we could have been closer to 3. I didn't track the time, but eventually we decided, hey, you know what? Let's take a break. But the process of doing that was so uplifting and enlightening for me. I look forward to those conversations, not because I got to chat with a good friend, true, fair, but rather because you think, I would watch a French film noir. That's a good example. That had I watched that, I stumbled across it on Amazon or Netflix or some other streaming service previously, I would have just kept going. It would have not been interesting to me at all, right? Honestly, it just would have been like, it's the pacing is weird. It's black and white. Maybe I'm looking at subtitles. It's a bunch of inconvenience. Why would I want to do that? I couldn't tell you. But in the context of the conversation, when I understood the frame, which was the development of technology, right? Because it was filmed at a moment, and something maybe about the director or about the actor or about the history and why that film was so significant in terms of the way that it had been construed. Kurosawa, right? Pick Kurosawa, right? I could have watched a Kurosawa film and not appreciated it or understood it at all. And what I found was the deeper I dove into my dialogue with Michael, and we always read, we would assign each other readings. We'd go out and we'd have assignments for each other, and we would go out and dig up something, and then the next thing, and then we would set the conversation. And often, like when we were working through art, we had to pick out 3 favorite pieces by somebody, Renoir or something, and be able to talk about why. So it always pushed us to think hard and do a little bit of additional digging in. And what I found was, yeah, fine, you could appreciate Renoir or you could appreciate a particular film. But more importantly, it enlarged my sense of understanding of my world. So suddenly now I'm watching some contemporary movie, or I see a piece of work in the Met, and I feel like it's just exploded the boundaries of my conception, and life just becomes so much more interesting and meaningful to me, because not only can I endure a film that I might not have ever watched before, but it links to so many other things. I mean, I'm a big Tarantino fan, and sorry, those people who don't appreciate Quentin. Because I had seen his films, and I remember the first time I had Pulp Fiction. Never mind the kind of shocking violence, but
Sure.
It's just the way he manipulates time, right? Time sequences. Because I'd seen some films that did that, but not like him, right? Where he took chapters in his film and put them out of order, and in doing that, right, a different hero emerges. And so in one set of sequences, it's like one person, one character is you're pulling for him, and you're oh, don't die, right? I hope this goes well. But in another chapter, you're seeing it through a different set of eyes, and that person that you were cheering for earlier might now be the villain or die, and you don't even care, right? You're like, yeah, good, he's gone, the antagonist.
The scene in the basement in Inglourious Bastards.
Yes, yes, there it is.
You obviously see his capacity to develop these hyper complex and supercharged scenes out of just pure dialogue and time.
Yes.
Like it's time between the notes that made the music.
Yes.
Instead of John Wick, right? Like the John Wick films, which are exciting and fun, but it's nonstop fight scene for like 90 minutes.
Oh, honestly, you're not
compared
wrong.
to the bar scene with like 3 verse 3, right, in Inglourious Bastards, and the actual violence that befalls everyone is like 3 seconds, but it's this 10-minute buildup where you're on the edge of your seat waiting for this thing to explode. And you see this building his capacity to do that through Reservoir Dogs,
Yes.
and
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, like an alternate reality. How can you not see that and think, well, wait, that's not what happened, right? All the good guys died, all the women. I mean, everybody. It's like Manson and the rest of it. And so he challenges your perspective. My point is not to shame anybody who's like, I love John Wick.
No, I love John. I saw them all.
But the simplicity, right, of the plot. And again, it sounds like I'm critiquing the film. I don't mean to say that. What I mean to say is that education, whether gained in a college classroom or personally in dialogue with your friends or in podcasts, and I got to say how much I envy you, that conversation you get to hold 5 times. You tell me how many times a day. But the way that stretches your mind and enlarges your reality, you get more out of your time. Here's the thing I hate. The notion, ennui. I hate boredom. I'd rather be busy than bored. I'd rather be unpleasantly busy than bored. Because to me, when a day or 2 or 3 or a week or 2 or 3 go by, and I can't point to anything that happened, I can't differentiate it from any other period of my life, I feel like I've lost that part of my life. It never happened. It's a fiction, right? Because we only have the present, right? We only have that little 16th of a second that we're aware of. And so for me, I want to fill my life with as many vivid, memorable experiences as I can possibly pack in, because I want to, I'll carry those forward. And I feel like education does that for me because now I see everything from knowing about semiotics and semantics. I see a symbol, a sign, and it's so much richer for me what it means and how it means by virtue of the educational context that I'm able to bring to it. So this isn't an argument for being smart. It's not an argument for any particular kind of experience. It's an argument for seeing all there is to see.
Good Lord, what you've said is so like, I don't even know which part to unpack necessarily, but I would like to point out that to your point about education being a lot of things, what I find in the state, especially now when I see the turmoil that people have, people are in general arguing philosophical points, and they don't view it that way.
Fair,
right?
Fair point.
They're trying to. They think that what they're doing is establishing a rule set that should be self-evident, but in reality, what they're doing is arguing for different philosophical endpoints because they're not going through the trouble of establishing how they got to that.
But we're not good at it.
End.
We're not. Again, I cannot say how strongly I agree with you. I mean, the moral reasoning, casuistry, is the technical term for it. Stephen Toulmin wrote a really important book about 40 years ago, The Abuse of Casuistry, in which he argued that we really have lost that capacity of moral reasoning. And we want it to be simple, right? We want it to be black and white. There's a right, there's a wrong. And what he pointed out was that, in fact, moral reasoning is almost always a series of oppositions. And you cannot reduce it except simplistically, overly simply. And, he the simple example, right? Somebody comes to your door, like, I'm being chased, they're going to murder me. Please give me refuge. Right. Let me in, let me hide. And of course you say, fine, okay, I'll do that. Go behind the couch. Somebody comes in after that, knocks on the door, bangs hard. And they say, look, is Bob here? I'm after him.
Right.
And you say, no, Bob's not here. And Toulmin says, okay, it's a lie. You have misrepresented the truth. And any normal person would be like, well, why is that important? That's not even significant. You're doing it to save a life, right?
Yeah, but now you're responsible.
Well, you're headed in what Tillman would say is the right direction. And he would say the point isn't whether you were right or wrong. The point is it was a lie. It was a misrepresentation. And you saved life, maybe. Let's say that's true, right? You saved life. Guy goes off, Bob's safe. But you also committed a transgression in terms of misrepresenting reality. And he says it's not that you have done, you've sinned, you've done some great wrong. It's that it don't deny that it is a moral transgression, the misrepresentation. You've told a lie to a person. And so he says you may end up saying wildly justified in that case. Well done, sir. One outweighed the other. Great. That's casuistry. And he says that we've lost the capacity to think about moral reasoning, the ability to weigh those things in opposition. And, we were talking again before we got underway about, pick a political issue in the state of Idaho, educational vouchers, vaccinations, tax rebates. Anything you want.
Public transit.
Holy cow. Oh, man. It took me an hour to get here, by the way. And Tillman would say none of those brook simplistic assumptions, analysis, outcomes. They will necessarily involve tensions among desirable values, and embrace that. Don't deny it. And as soon as you do that, it stops getting personal, and it stops getting polarized, and it stops becoming so vitriolic. And instead, you're able to talk about like, wow, who wouldn't want to value the autonomy, the capacity to determine your own fate, about what gets put in your body. That seems like a terrific good to me.
Sure.
The ability to make decisions about, again, public transport and so forth. Pick one of those. And so I think on the one hand, you say those are good values that almost anybody would get behind. On the other hand, there are competing values. And what we need to do is be able to reason our way through those, not understand that, we're never going to reach consensus. Not everybody will ever agree about almost anything important, but we will be better informed about the opposition, right? The other side of the arguments. And this is all the way back to the classical period, that the stronger will prevail. If not, in fact, every time, because that's, I wish that were true.
Sure.
But at least most of us will have clarity in our perception. Do you see? What's the value of a political debate, of making people stand up and argue things and answer questions from the press? It's inflected by, maybe there's some interesting study of Lincoln, right? Lincoln-Douglas debates, that the voting records, what they found was people who showed up and saw Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln debate each other in such an important historical moment. The people who saw them actually voted preponderance for Stephen Douglas. The people who read about the debates, the transcripts of the debates were widely publicized in newspapers. Those people who didn't have access to the in-person, but they did have access to reading about them, voted in preponderance for Lincoln. And one of the conclusions that they took from that is that Lincoln was not a great public speaker. He was tall, he's gangly, had this kind of nasty voice, a little shrill. And Stephen Douglas, right, the little giant, this guy, they called him, just powerful, articulate, eloquent speaker, was so compelling in person that people came away from having watched the debate saying, that's the guy, that's the one I believe. But people who read the arguments and thought about them in opposition to each other, because they would have a transcript of both men, and what they found in those cases was that the people voted for Lincoln because his arguments were more compelling. And the point to all of that is you need that opposition, right? All the way back to triangulation or dialectic. Weighing these things in opposition to each other shows you their strengths and weaknesses. And again, this goes all the way back to, there was no differentiation made in the classical period between Olympic Games, right? Running races, and debate, argumentation, because they believed the same substrate was present in both cases. That if you're running a race, you're not racing the other people, you're racing yourself. You're trying to do your very best, and you do your very best, it turns out, when you are pressed by the sense of competition with others. Similarly in debate, you're not trying to beat your debate opponent. The agonistic intersection, the contest, and agon translates to contest. The contest produces the best discernment. If you have a really capable arguer, right, interlocutor, and they have a weak argument, it's probably a case that it's not a strong argument. So they argue, they were like, train people, give them the best capacity to articulate this forcefully, and then let them go at it and make them switch sides and move it around. But what the people watching will perceive, correctly discern, the stronger and the weaker, the better and the worse. And they really believed that. And that was true forensically of, crimes like who's guilty, who the heck knows? We'll let them argue it out and we'll watch. And a really good lawyer will make a good argument. But if there's only so much argument to be made, well, that's not the stronger side. And okay, what about honoring or blaming, right? About right now, not past, now present. Or what about legislature, which is going forward? Those were the three contexts, past, present, forward. And they believed in all three cases. You're making arguments, and then the stronger and the weaker will be discerned by people, and then not every time, not always, but largely. And then that will enable the people, right, the demos, to make the right decision. And I love that foundation because I think it applies at so many different levels, including, again, as I've said over and over again, it's very personal to me in my own life. I only know what I think by engaging other people, engaging arguments. Now, again, education reminds us, one of the glories of education is it teaches you how to commune with people long dead. And I'm not talking about Ouija boards, books, right? Things they have written and left us. And feeling that camaraderie, that sense of connectedness. I remember reading Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, philosophical piece, World War II. Had come through the Holocaust. He knew what he was talking about. But his thesis was essentially find the thing that's meaningful to you and cling to it. And I remember just being so enraged when I read that book because I felt like, if it doesn't have any objective merit or meaning in the world, you're saying just attach yourself to something and that'll be your thing. And I just I'd rather kill myself than live a life like that. Socrates, right?
Sure.
Unexamined life is not worth living. And I couldn't wrap my head around it. It just seemed like a betrayal of everything I cared about. But in contrast, when I stumbled into Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus, which is this short treatise on life in which he says, Sisyphus rolling that rock up the hill for eternity. It rolls back down. He has to go back, start over again. That was his punishment from the gods. And Camus builds from that to say, look, life is hard. In fact, it's terrible in the sense that every one of us will experience tragedy. We will lose loved ones. We'll experience pain. We'll experience suffering. Guaranteed, right? And wait. What about, rich people? What about people who have a life of leisure? What about, fine, there are differences in terms of our individual paths, the lives we lead, but everybody will experience that loss, that tragedy, death of people that, loss of things that they love and people that they love, right? Of the pets they love. And so the point to all that is not to say that all of our lives are the same, but rather Elizabeth Cady Stanton famously in the 19th century said before Congress in arguing that women should be able to go to school. You wouldn't think that needed to be argued, but it did. Okay. And she stood before Congress and she said, the solitude of self, really famous address she gave. She said that nobody can stand between us and these moments of hardship. And that is a rationale, a compelling rationale to fully educate every person, because in moments of childbirth and death and suffering and loss and betrayal that all of us will experience repeatedly over the course of our lives, nobody can stand in for us. Nobody can be our parent or our defender ultimately we have to, right? We go that path alone. And so she said, that is the justification for developing every individual to the fullest extent of their capacity. So I get, you see where I'm headed with this, right?
May I add something to
Please do.
That, I saw this kid's movie recently called Rango.
Yeah.
It's like the chameleon.
Great
right.
kids movie.
And I appreciated it from a number of reasons. Like obviously Westerns are this kind of like American mythical thing I also watched Alien vs. Cowboys the other day,
which is a great cowboy movie. No, don't you apologize.
Like it was great.
Come on.
It's because I watch a lot of trash sci-fi. And so it's like kind of thing with my boys is like, okay, we call it what trash can movie are we watching tonight? 'Cause it's like trash sci-fi, right?
But again,
it wasn't as bad as it could have been.
Yeah.
Right? Harrison Ford, Daniel Craig. But in Rango, there's the point of this whole story that this chameleon's going through, and he's like trying to survive, and at the end he meets the spirit of the West.
Yeah.
And the guy in the white golf cart with the like golden balls hanging out the back. Tells him, because Rango's like essentially given up. He's like, no man can walk out of his own story.
There it is.
And there's the
suddenly it tricks you into a profound moment of insight, right?
Where
child's cartoon.
Yes, even in it's like, you can't hit pause to your own story. Yeah. No one can take Nobody can take this role from you in the hard times of life.
There it
You
is.
have to be, your story's going to keep going. And if it's one of you escaping and saving your own hide, then that will be your story. But there's no stand-in for you.
Yeah, and that's, again, just to make sure I'm pointing at least back to some coherence, I would say, when it works, college education does that. And I do feel terrible about the fact that I think that it's become a kind of a single-minded obsession with getting jobs. And again, I work at the school as the number one employment rate after graduation, right? So I'm all about practicality. It's an investment of time and money, and you need to be employed. And so, our students are. But I'm as interested in their moral and ethical development, in the development of compassion, in the development of the capacity for a life well lived, as I am in the work that they'll do. So I want it all. I want both, right? And I work very hard with our students, as do our faculty and the rest of the staff, to ensure that we're really attending to both of those things.
Yeah, but if you don't, you just make well-employed demons.
Well-employed demons, and maybe not even employed demons, in the sense that we know that the number of times people change careers has accelerated, right? It used to be plural, and now it's more plural. The point being that, all the computer scientists that came out, from, code camps a minute ago saying, look, I'm world's my oyster, I'm a techie. And now suddenly we're seeing coders dropping like flies because AI can do code better than humans can, it turns out. And increasingly, those jobs that were narrow and technical, we're finding those people are out of work, and they're not easily retrained because they didn't bother to develop the durable, portable skills of critical thinking and analysis, the wisdom, right? Not just the knowledge. And so I worry a lot about them because it's one thing to find you're out of work when you're 23 or 24. It's another thing when you're 33 or 34 or 43 and 44.
Yeah. Lonesome Dove, the book. I'm a big fan, right?
Yeah, same.
And I have a dear friend
And
from
movie.
college.
I'm saying it's series.
I actually never saw the TV or movie or anything. Yeah,
Matt,
I think they should redo it.
Yeah.
I'd never even seen the old ones. I just know when they did the original Hobbit movie, it was terrible.
It was
they had to redo the Lord of the Rings, right?
But to our point, I would say, like you, I'm a big fan of westerns. How can you not be, right? I love the spaghetti, Sergio Leone, the spaghetti westerns, right? So the early, especially the trilogy of Clint Eastwood films, right? Good, the Bad, the Ugly, Fistful of Dollars for a few dollars more.
What about No Country for Old Men?
Well, but you're seeing where I'm going. So you watch those at the first flush, and you're saying, what great classic films. You can appreciate the mythic stories, the characters and so forth. But then when you see the reprise that Clint Eastwood did in Unforgiven, which is kind of a weird commentary. It's a great film. And it also flashes back on all of his early films where he shot people without any remorse or consequence. Suddenly in Unforgiven, he's old, he's suffering, he's grumpy, and every act that he takes has a dramatic consequence, right? And it's this wonderful kind of undoing, redoing, a kind of glance over the shoulder at all those early films that he did, all the way, I would even include Dirty Harry and, some of the others that he did as a young man. And so to your point, I think that pluralized and complicated the genre. And so that when one of us sees one of these movies, right, that suddenly the whole concept of a Western has become more interesting and rich, although I like those too.
What about Gran Torino as an
organized
Western?
There it is.
Like, you want to talk about complexity. The storyline and characters track perfectly all the way down to the hero sacrificing his life to get rid of the people literally shooting at him out of a 2-story building. Like, it could have been a holdup in the middle of a dirt town with two people, so you have these really complex narratives that resonate and stand the test of time, that found representation originally in this Western setting, but now we understand them in context of just humanity.
And go even farther and say, again, the structure of that narrative where he's racist, he doesn't like any outsiders, he's, looking backward his whole life, his marriage, his military service. He's valuing that. That's at the center. That's his integrity. And then he discovers through food, right? Because they're feeding him. He's like, wow, this is really good food. And he discovers the common humanity, and these poor people are being set upon and suffering. And his own protective and defensive instincts, his desire to save others, having been a military man, having been a spouse, now to the grumpy old age that he's at, he steps fully into that role, right, with these people that he would have previously discarded entirely, didn't like anything about them. And then, to your point, makes the ultimate sacrifice. And I think you can't appreciate that unless you've seen a lot of movies, start there, but also very self-consciously made a point of understanding how narrative works, because you see enough stories, you start to see commonalities, right? There is a tension, there's a hero, there's an antagonist, there's the denouement, the rising, the falling. Some are tragedies, comedies, and I just think that again, the point that I'm aiming for, probably not well, consistently through our conversation, is that by complicating our understanding, we enrich it. Being able to say this resonates with that, right? This is like that, this is not like that, somehow just makes life so much more interesting, right? When you understand the genre, the theory, the abstraction, then every new episode of it, every instantiation or inscription of it is like, oh, I get it. This is a rom-com, I know enough about, I know.
The complexity, to your point, the reason I brought up Lonesome Dove is because the struggle that coders and truckers are going through is exactly the struggle that people have been experiencing with the elimination of industry, be that the Texas Rangers, be that, truck drivers, be whatever. And you see these glimpses of competence and shifting of industry. The problem, I think one of the real main struggles that our country and our world is suffering through is those used to be very long and slow transitions. Like the transition from, what was it, turn of the century in 1901, you had like 50% of the U.S. workforce working in ag. And it took until 1950 to be like 10%. So you have these 50 years of retooling. You have world wars, you have industry coming along. Before that, in the 1800s, what industries were rising and falling? Maybe some canneries and stuff. But like all of a sudden now, it was 10 years ago, learn to code. And if every truck driver had listened to that person, learned to code, now they'd be out of their next job, right? Like you have, it's like we're doing a decade and industries rise and fall, products rise and fall. You have all consumer trends that are also driving this, Blu-ray versus HD, right? Like you had a whole thing of like which disc is going to win the day.
Turns out none.
Right. And it's that kind of thing where it's almost like, where do people invest? When I had this conversation with my wife multiple times over the last couple of months, because again, 3 young boys, and we're staring at this like, okay, what do we steer them towards to have durability and longevity within their adult life, both economically and otherwise? And we come back to the same thing that you're saying, which is these durable, transferable skills. You have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to learn. Learning as a skill has become one of the most fundamental pieces, right? Like all of these different things where it's like, and if, my own professional trajectory is as crazy and insane as anything you could find with no direction, but this thread of capacity kind of weaving its way through.
And boy, again, a lot to unpack there. Two things occur to me. One is that our society is not built to accommodate those rapid changes. And so you look at our educational institutions, here's a shoe on the other foot. Instead of extolling valorizing higher ed, extolling the virtues. Faculty, as a faculty member, right? I was trained as a professor. I learned at the feet of my mentors. It's a guild, right? And then I hope I pressed the envelope. I developed new information, knowledge. I updated my classes and so forth. But notwithstanding, it's a slow moving, train. And so the consequences, I was part of a national webinar here recently involving programs that folks think we should be launching. And the number one that was identified in terms of all the metrics in the world was creator economics. That effectively that is to say that you go back 10 or 12
economics.
Hang in.
Listen to me.
Hang in.
No one makes money.
Hang in. But we're coming to that. That was the point that they made. First of all, you think back like, what are we? Everybody's going to be a Kardashian, and the answer is no. There was a minute where to be an influencer, you had to have notoriety, fame. You had to, and not very many people could really achieve it. You need a lot of money, a lot of luck, right? But it has become an absolutely viable career path now that has outstripped so many other conventional and familiar career paths. And it involves, you think of what this is, it's working across platforms and social media. It's monetizing your own personal brand. It's having enough tech to be able to, handle the video or the podcast, to do just enough what you need to do. You also, by the way, have to have enough savvy relative to business to be able to keep your books, pay your taxes, make sure that you're not going broke.
Adhere to your contracts.
Do your P&L. Absolutely, all of that. You probably need to know, to our point a moment ago, and a little bit about narrative, how to understand the story that's being told, or what's attractive or interesting, whether you have an intuitive sense of it or a learned one, marketing, right? Maybe some of that. And on down this list. And so the argument that was being made was no school in the country at that time, right? I mean, they couldn't pick one. Nobody has that program. That's not a major. And why? Well, because it's not traditional. It's not old. No one has a PhD in that to teach it to other people. And so we have little pieces of it, maybe in our TV, right? Studying radio, television, maybe people in narrative theory, maybe English departments, maybe people in the business department for the marketing part, maybe, and so it goes. So it's there, but it's disaggregated, and it's really hard to, make a coherent path through college to get those things to be a creator. And so my point is not that colleges should, turn on a dime, but they're not built for speed. They're built for conserving knowledge and propagating knowledge and doing research, but not flipping to be able to accommodate this new emergent career path. So one problem, to the point that you were making earlier, is that right? We just don't have systems that enable people to adjust to the careers that don't even exist yet, right? That by the time they graduate, the career is opening up, but maybe their academic experience didn't match that. The second one, more briefly, and this one I think is a really important one in my experience. Talk about reading broadly. I am not a Marxist. I would like to be really clear about that.
Sure.
But here's a piece from Karl Marx: the tendency for us to become what we do. That if you, for example, a great scene in Taxi Driver, right? Where you say, oh man, this is having this existential crisis. Robert De Niro is having this, oh, do you ever wonder about your life? And his partner, who's, cabbie, says, I'm a taxi driver. No, I don't think about that. I drive my cab. And it's this wonderful encapsulation of the fact that our jobs want us to be a certain thing, right? I mean, the job is not, I don't mean to personify a job. I mean to say doing a thing invites a certain way of being in the world. Yes. It invites a certain consciousness, and it actively discourages other ways of being in the world. Or, so you find these didacts, right? People who, they sell insurance during the day. Sapir, I'm thinking of, Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Sure. Insurance during the day, and at night you're a brilliant linguist and you write treatises and you push the boundaries of knowledge. Those are very few people. The vast majority of us, right? If you're doing mindless retail or you're working a cash register in fast food, and I am not disparaging those jobs. I have done those jobs, by the way. Sure. I've washed dishes and picked fruit and dried fruit, a lot of fruit in my life. Anyway, the point is that existence invites a certain kind of identity, and you have to fight it to be larger and better and different and more thoughtful and more broad-minded and more compassionate than your job allows. Other jobs invite it, right? And so my point is it doesn't determine who you are, but it certainly shapes who you are. And so I guess in a way I'm all the way back to the luxury of engaging people in conversations about broad-reaching ideas is itself, it leaves a mark on you. It's indelible, right? I mean, it changes your character. So I want that for all of us.
I'm with you on absolutely everything you've said until the creator's economics.
You're stuck on that. Still stuck on that.
Well,
Move on.
I think it actually ties in 100% to what you said, which is we become what we do, or we are what we do, whatever that might be, right?
We trend toward what we do. Yeah.
Well, if you have teenagers staring at phones for 5 hours a day, 6 hours a day, people get they're like, oh, I want to become this creator. But what they don't, I saw this fantastic little clip. It was a clip of this gal making scrambled eggs. It's called a caption bomb, where you essentially just have a hook on the front, and then usually it goes down to some copy at the bottom. But and the video is irrelevant, right? It helps if it's an attractive lady. So this woman's making scrambled eggs. It's like how to make $80,000 on Instagram, and you wait 2 seconds. Start by making a video that says you made $80,000 on Instagram. Right. And we have this problem. If I ask you, okay, do you know an attorney? And you're like, yeah, I know attorneys. Like, great. Do you know doctors? Do you know whatever, plumbers, electricians, anybody making money? You're like, yes, I know these people. Name one person you know personally that makes money being a creator. We know they exist, but no one actually podcasts. Everyone knows that there's $100 million or $200 million contract rolling around with Joe Rogan. We got Theo Von. You got this about.
Oh, Matt, that's a bit rich coming from you. Here we are sitting in your plush studio. I'm surrounded by the fruits of your labor. And so you yourself, sir, are evidence of the possibilities of achievement. So how about that? What?
This equipment was not bought with podcast revenue.
I'm confident it is. And
I'm very confident you're wrong.
The Bentley you have parked out in front, I'm saying
it's a Maserati. But the funny thing about this is people spend. You have this hyper visible thing, and everyone knows it exists, but nobody knows somebody who has actually done one that makes money.
Yeah.
Right. So when we talk about creator economics, it's like, take a seat, because by the way, I do know somebody who's made a lot of money personally with a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Okay. It is not like, and this guy worked at it for 7 years, stumbled through all kinds of different things, and finally brought some livestock into his house.
Yikes.
And figured out a way that like that resonated. But to say that anybody that there's an economics, it's like, okay, great, get 100,000 followers and start running advertisements. Okay, great. Like you could say that to somebody. How do you get 100,000 followers? How do you start running? How do you get 100,000 followers around a certain industry that's relevant? Right? We all know that it happens, but the number of people
who make it big.
It's probably like 0.1% of people are making 99% of the money.
Yeah, see, I got over my skis on this part because, again, I mean, you're.
I've been living this one. I've been living this one for years.
Maseratis, whatever.
But again,
that's not
this
important.
is probably something. Back to your point. This is probably something that youth are looking at it, and parents are looking at it, saying like, "I want to know how to make money in the creative space." Everyone does because this is what they're doing.
Well, okay, so back to again, my argument is not that people should be following that career because I do understand
should or shouldn't
is not
they're
the point.
interested in. People are talking about it.
And
visual.
Again, the career data are pretty clear that it has become a viable career path for a significant number of folks, and it's the intermediate salaries are sustainable. I mean, people could live on those.
What's
things.
the data?
So
what's that data?
Yeah, let's go pull it up. Yeah,
let's pull it up.
Yeah,
let's. I'll tell you what, we're gonna dig deep. This is our next conversation. We're gonna dig deep into the creative economics because I actually want to know.
I believe in it
because I know people predominantly use the social media to market.
Yeah.
They don't actually use social media to. It doesn't make them money. So like, for instance, if you're a realtor, you can market yourself more, but that's conflating, hey, this is the money you're making from Instagram versus you attracted people into your real estate practice. Those are different things, right?
Right. Because the fraction of a penny you're earning on every view that you happen to get. Now, again, how do you monetize? You don't get paid by YouTube. You get paid by advertisers, right? I mean, it's a secondary. No, completely agree with that. And again, to be clear, my point was that higher ed is conservative in terms of how quickly it changes. I will say, serendipitously, we've landed on this question of, creator economics and social media.
Sure.
I am fascinated by it. I led a book group a bit ago on John Ronson's So You've Been Shamed by the Internet. Holy cow, what a powerful beast, right? And we're still figuring out new ways to utilize it, both individually, right? As entrepreneurs, people can use it to monetize their brand and to try and make money. But also, the social capital that is, generated and spent. And of course, retail, commerce, Amazon. I mean, these models that couldn't even have been conceived a few decades ago and now dominate the landscape and have changed the shape of the way that we exist, the way we buy. I want to say she was in the Times. I don't remember for sure, but there was a fascinating series. This woman decided she was going to go a year, if I recall correctly, and not buy any clothing at all. She was not going to buy a single stitch. And she was a big clothing person. And so this was an important part of her life. And what she talked about was, first, she had lots of clothes. So that she was not suffering. This was not a thrifting story. It's not about that. She had tons of stuff in her closet. But what she found was that she spent so much of her time thinking about clothes and surfing about clothes and, looking on social media about clothes and looking at what influencers are wearing. And maybe the changing seasons and the colors that we're in and the styles and all the rest of it. And so it wasn't about clothes at all. It was about how profoundly that particular dimension of consumption had shaped her life. And it was all contingent on media, social media, because you couldn't have done that even a few decades ago, right? I mean, now it's possible to sit there and spend every spare moment on a screen doing your thing.
On fashion.
And the point is, whether that's gaming, whether that's Facebook, whether that is your thing, whatever your thing is, that your life gets shaped in that way. So I guess in a way this resonates with the comment about what you become what you do. There's a cautionary tale there for us, isn't there? Pick carefully.
I couldn't agree more. David, look, can we do this? This has been a wildly fascinating conversation.
It's a wildly divergent conversation,
which makes it like, what I always tell
people? We're chasing each other downhill and see who falls over their feet.
Oh my God.
First.
It's funny that people come in and they're very concerned about having a good conversation. Okay. And because to that end, they come in with like an outline and they come in with like lots of things. And what I always find funny about that is like, listen, the most interesting conversations you've ever had in your life, you never knew where they were going. Right. If it behaves exactly as you predicted, that's not actually interesting at all. So like, I love the breadth of information we've covered. Can we line up a second one?
Oh, yeah,
And I would love to start digging into when you talk about, look, we are creating both what we feel are morally responsible and employed individuals.
Yes.
I would love to understand
building a better human.
Right. Let's build a better human, because people talk about that, but then it's like, okay, well, does that mean you have a great thinker that can't actually engage in the world? Or do you have anyway, let's keep the conversation going. The only reason I'm saying we have to put a pin in it is because I have somebody coming to talk about solar and renewable energy in Ada County.
A conversation that matters, by the way. No.
Because these are so important, because again, at the core of it, it's how do we make better people? It used to be de facto answer for a lot of people that it's like, well, more education. And in late that people have steered away from that, and now it's like, oh no, less education is better. And it's like, wait, can we just talk about a possible option? There's no right way or wrong way.
Of course. And again, the cost of higher ed these days is profound, and people should not go into debt for, a generation or two in order to pay for a college education. Ridiculous. So I think that the practical realities of higher ed are really important. Although they're less interesting in some ways. And I think we make a mistake by starting there, right? They're less interesting than the foundational questions about what is a life well lived? What is of value? What does good education look like? No, we'll come back and talk about all that later. But in the meantime, back at you, sir. It's been a fascinating conversation. And I would just, maybe the Parthian shot for me is, I think that those who really get podcasting, I'm not one of them, but those who understand it, and you are, I think understand that what people want to hear, what I want to hear, is not some by rote shilling of a particular position politically, operationally, technically, or anything else. What they want to hear is people talking about things that matter. And so this has certainly represented that to me. Thank you for a lovely conversation.
Yeah.
Best part of my day, week, month. I don't want to say that.
Next time you come in, I'm lining up 3 hours, and I'm getting, I don't know if you're a coffee guy, but I'm going to get like a gigantic French press, and we're going to go to the moon.
Buddy, my addiction. Thank you. Yeah.
It's going to be fantastic. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for making the time, and we're absolutely doing this again.
All right, Matt. Be well.